Our mission, Helping Parents Heal, is a nonprofit organization dedicated to assisting bereaved parents. Through support and resources offered, we aspire to help individuals become shining light parents, meaning a shift from a state of emotional heaviness to one of hopefulness and greater peace of mind. Helping Parents Heal goes a step beyond other groups by allowing the open discussion of spiritual experiences and afterlife evidence in a non-dogmatic way. Helping Parents Heal affiliate groups welcome everyone, regardless of religious or non-religious background, and encourage open dialogue. Attendance at all meetings is voluntary. All discussions that take place at affiliate-led meetings are confidential. We hope that participants will learn from and share with each other. Zoom meetings run by leadership are not confidential. These meetings typically feature guest presenters and are posted on YouTube so that affiliate members worldwide can watch and benefit. Neither type of Helping Parents Heal meeting is designed to replace traditional therapy or spiritual counseling. Helping Parents Heal offers a wide variety of speakers, allowing parents to learn about many possible ways to heal. This includes presenters covering progressive topics such as afterlife evidence and connecting with our children who have passed. The views expressed by our guest speakers may or may not reflect the opinions of Helping Parents Heal leaders and members, so we ask that you take from their presentations whatever may benefit you personally. Welcome, everyone, and thank you, Leanne, so much for being here today.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Leanne, for being here. And I just wanted to let everyone know that there should be time for questions at the end. So if you have questions that you'd like to ask of Leanne, please put them in the chat box. I'd like to just do a short bio just so that you know a little bit more about Leanne. My name is LeAnn Hull, and my youngest son, Andy, moved to heaven after completing suicide on December 11th, 2012 at the age of 16. Andy's nickname is Sunshine, given to him by his friends and coaches because of his bright and sunny disposition. Almost immediately, I felt compelled to share with the world the love and joy that he brought to us through a foundation I started called Andy Hull's Sunshine Foundation. Within the first month, I sought out a reputable medium who shared with me transformational information from my son. This would be pivotal in moving me forward in the healing process. In addition, she suggested that I contact a local group called Helping Parents Heal, which has been established by by Elizabeth. After attending my first meeting, I knew that this was the place where I could learn and continue to grow spiritually. This journey has included attending regular meetings, reading 80 books during the first year of my healing, meeting with my son through some gifted mediums, and many coffee meetings with other Shining Light parents. My growth was documented in the book which I wrote entitled How to Live When You Want to Die. I hope that you will find healing and joy again as I have. I also write a column for our Helping Parents Heal newsletter, Spreading Sunshine, and I am a co-affiliate leader of the HPH affiliate group Healing After Suicide. She has a website as well, www.andysunshine.com. I'm going to put that in the chat box. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming LeAnn Hull. Welcome, Leanne.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here today, especially on such short notice. So I think it's just such an important thing that we talk about today, and I can't wait to share some of it with you. So yes, indeed, this group was so pivotal in my ability to move forward. And the fact that I found the group so fast and that I had a reading so quickly really was a shove forward in my journey. But let's just start with today, because I know that everybody around the world has heard the news about the passing of Lisa Marie Presley. And I just grieve for her family, for her mom, who has just now suffered another loss in her life. And so I'm sending my love to her, her children, her family, everybody. Such compassion, not only for Lisa Marie, but for the family that's been left behind. My concern with the messaging that's been happening today is really what stems from my desire to have this conversation. And one of the articles that was brought to my attention was an article by People magazine, and it was published late last night, republished late last night after it was determined that Lisa Marie had passed. And the headline says, Lisa Marie Presley said she was destroyed by my son Benjamin's death, but kept going on for my girls. Her son Benjamin died by suicide. And it had been 2 years since her son had passed. So there's a couple of things that I highlighted in the article because I thought they're so important for us to address today. And that's kind of where I want to start. It's a pretty long article. I don't know whether I'd recommend you read it or not, but maybe if you want to, for reference sake, by all means. But in the article, it starts out that she is writing this on today is National Grief Awareness Day. And since I've been living in the horrific reality of its unrelenting grips since my son's death 2 years ago. And then she goes on to say, but if we're going to make any progress on the subject, grief has to get talked about. And so right there are two things that I want to address. Of course, when our child moves to heaven, we experience the depths and the pain, the horrific pain of loss and grief. That is something that I know I experienced, and it was definitely a struggle for me for the first 2 years. It's not that long for everybody, and it's not that short for others. But to write the horrific reality of its unrelenting grips, to me, that is saying that you're going to have a life sentence of grief that's going to grip your life and basically strangle the life out of you, the lifeblood out of you. And if I were a new parent, a newly grieving parent, if I just lost my child and I read something like that, to me, that would be very hopeless. And it might even lead me to follow in my son's footsteps. When I wrote the book, How to Live When You Want to Die, it's because those thoughts had entered my mind. But the thoughts are what I had to manage. And my path forward was what the book is about and is what this is about. So that statement does not lend itself to any path forward. And then the statement that we're not going to make any progress unless grief gets talked about. Well, of course, we do want to talk about grief, but I don't know how many of you are familiar with Paul Harvey, but to me, that's ending the story before you hear the rest of it. If you're going to talk about grief, you have to also follow it with healing. You can begin with grief, but then you have to move into healing. That's so important that conversation doesn't end with grief has to get talked about. By all means, let's talk about it, but then how are we going to move forward from it? She goes on to say that one is that, the challenges with grief. One is that grief does not stop or go away in any sense a year or years after the loss. Grief is something you will have to carry with you for the rest of your life. In spite of what certain people or our culture wants us to believe, you do not get over it and you do not move on. Well, that's a very misleading and unfortunate statement for her to make. First of all, she's very new in her grief. She's 2 years into it. And my personal experience was my first 2 years, they were extremely challenging. The benefit that I had of that is that I kept doing the work. I began the work early on in my journey. I started going to meetings. I attended support group regularly. And I remember early on, I used to joke about this with Elizabeth, and I would say, oh my gosh, I hate going to your meetings. I hate it. I hate it. I practically have to drag myself there. And then yet by the time the meeting is done, I walk away and I would feel some hopefulness, and I would always feel better. And I would know that I was coming back the next month. And that was the beauty of that, is that I made some decisions, not some emotional responses about my journey forward. So I had decisions that I'd made. I didn't want to stay where I was. I didn't want to stay in that place of pain and sorrow and sadness. And if I didn't want to stay there, I had to find some paths forward. I had to use some tools to help me get forward, because what I was doing myself and with the information that I had just in living my life, I didn't have enough information. I didn't have enough tools in order to move myself forward. And I'm an educated person. I owned a business. I'm a mother of 4 children. I've lived a full life, but I had never experienced the loss of a child. So these were new things, new tools, and new things that I had to learn. And that meant I had to put myself in a position to learn those things, to experience them. And so making those decisions to go to attend the meetings and to hear different messaging. I had attended some other grief groups that when I looked around the room and we'd go around and we'd share, I heard people and they'd tell how long they'd been at the meetings. And they said, well, I've been here 15 years or whatever. And they'd share their story. And I'm a newly bereaved mom, and I'm listening to them, and they sounded like I sounded. They sounded at 15 years like what I sounded at week 1. And I thought, well, then they're not getting the messaging necessary. There's not enough information in this group to help me move forward, because I didn't want to sound like them. I didn't want to be that same place in 15 years where I was right now. And that meant I had to be very vigilant about my mental health process and surrounding myself with the right tools. So talking about grief and carrying it for the rest of your life. I think for us as newly bereaved parents, what I hear from other parents is that there's a connection between grief and their child. And there's a fear that if they let go of the grief, then someone else outside, or even themselves they themselves might judge themselves and say, well, gosh, am I over it? Or people are going to think, I actually have had people say to me, you obviously didn't love your child as much as I love mine. I've heard people say that to me who've been in the grieving process, which is obviously a silly thing to say, but in any event, I know that's a real fear. And so what we have to do is to pull apart and separate this grief from our child. Will I ever forget Andy? Of course not. Can I let go of the grief and separate it? And is there a better way for me to remember Andy than it being attached with this grief molecule that's just all consuming and absorbing? Yes, I can. I can detach. And that was so important for me. That was a really important concept to understand, that separation. And really, if you think about it, if we're concerned about what anybody else thinks about our journey or our process, outside of our group and another bereaved parent or a shining light parent or whatever you want to call us, outside of our group of parents, there's nobody out there that would ever possibly understand what we're going through or have gone through. Nobody could relate to that had they not experienced it. So it's kind of fruitless in a sense for us to even try to explain that to them or justify it. So I don't really care what people think anymore about my process or my journey, because I know they can't relate. You all can, because you've experienced it. And so that conversation has more validity, it has more depth and sustainability. So you do not get over it and you do not move on. It's not the truth. And unfortunately, that is the information that is circling around on our social media and on the internet, is that you don't get over it. And it's the only way that you can honor someone that you've lost. Well, and then let me go to the next 2 items and then we'll talk some more. She says, number 2, grief is incredibly lonely. And I think that, and isolating to a certain extent, I think we could all agree that there's a degree of truth there. And at least for myself, there was a shift from a set of friends and people in my life before my child moved to heaven. And that group of friends, that significant group of friends, for the most part, they're gone. After 10 years, I really have very few of them that are still in my circle of influence. And what that does is, so yes, that does create some loneliness and some isolation, but then it's up to you. Then you have to make that decision of, I got to go find my new people. I got to go find my new tribe, the new people that are going to relate and help me in my journey forward. Because frankly, those people wouldn't have served you well anyway, because they just are never going to be able to understand. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't still be friends with them or still have them. I'm just saying there's now more room for people that are going to serve you better and that you can serve better in your journey forward. And so that's really up to you to change that isolation and that loneliness. And you can do that. It just takes some work. And then the number 3 thing that I think is so important, she says, number 3, particularly if the loss was premature, unnatural, tragic, like suicide, you will become a pariah in a sense. So I get that question. I get 2 questions a lot. And the pariah question is the one that I love to address, first of all. People always, there's so much stigma and shame attached to suicide, even drug loss, overdose. There's a definite preconceived sense of shame and stigma in our society. And what I knew is that when Andy died by suicide, it's the first thing I addressed was, because I knew that in the back of my mind, apparently, and I knew that shame and stigma was out there in society. And so when I began going back out into the world, it's the first thing I talked about. That fearful question I get all the time. Well, what do you say when people ask you how many children you have? I say, I have 4 kids. My youngest one, Andy, he died by suicide when he was 16. He's in heaven. I have 2 other boys that are in the military. I have a daughter who's a nurse, and I'm doing so much great work now around suicide prevention in honor of my son, Andy, who is just such an amazing kid. I'd love to tell you about him sometime. So what that did right there was it dismissed any stigma and shame that could possibly be out there, because I owned the conversation. I'm no longer just a recipient of whatever they have to say or ask. I've taken control of it. And I'm going to be in charge of the narrative right then and there. And they've just recognized that I'm not presenting myself in a sense of shame or stigma. I am not judged, and nor is Andy, by how he died. And I make that very clear in my statement. Suicide is a broken brain. It's a malfunction of the brain. My daughter has diabetes. It's a malfunction of her pancreas. It doesn't work at all. Suicide is a no different death or passing or transition than cancer, a car accident, whatever, however your child passes. Because it's just the same. We're not afraid to say our child passed by cancer. You shouldn't be afraid to say my child died by suicide. And then do the Paul Harvey thing. And the rest of the story is, and my kid was amazing. This is what we did. So you've shifted out of a position of sadness, and your transition and your healing journey will be that you have to speak it first before you can be it. If you're going to speak in terms of sadness, embarrassment, shame, stigma, you take that on first. That is what you're projecting. You're owning those words first. And now not only are you owning it, but you've put it out into the universe, and you've manifested it in everybody else. Take it away, dispel it. We as parents if you have lost a child to suicide or overdose or anything like that, we can change that narrative by honoring our children how they lived and not by how they moved. That I love the owning the conversation. To me, that is just so important. I oftentimes talk about, whether it's you've lost all your children, whether you've lost one child. I've lost my husband too. I've lost my mom, and then I just lost my son-in-law a year ago. So lots and lots of losses. And inevitably, I hear from people, even within our circle of shining light parents, who will try to separate themselves out from the group and single out their loss as that their loss is more difficult. In running my group, the affiliate group for suicide, the biggest message that I want to get across to parents who've lost kids to suicide is, if I'm having a conversation, and I'm just going to use Carol because I've used her many times. She's a dear friend. She's a caring listener. She's an affiliate leader. I think so many of you know who Carol is. And so Carol lost her son. Her son transitioned from a motorcycle accident. I cannot even imagine, in my wildest imagination, to sit in front of Carol and tell Carol that the loss of my son was worse than the loss of her son. She would laugh me right out the door. She'd probably slap me. Because there's no way that's even possible. To her loss is just as big as my loss. And for us to compare losses, all we're doing in that is creating more isolation and more separation, instead of what we need to be doing, which is focusing on the healing and moving forward and the love and the connections with our kids. So let me talk about the connections, because that's a pretty big topic for me. My background is an evangelical Christian, fundamentalist, born again, and Bible-based, read the Bible front to back many times, very biblically, I know the Bible very well. And after Andy passed, that was the first place, of course, that I reached out to, was my church. And my church didn't have my church. And I have heard other people whose churches have been very supportive. Mine wasn't. Mine gave me the platitudes of, your son's in a better place and you'll see him again in heaven. Okay. And that was never going to be enough for me. So while I obviously knew from my faith that my son was in heaven, I wanted to know more. I wanted to know, what's he doing in heaven? I wanted to know so much. I wanted to still have a relationship with him, even if it couldn't be in the physical. And so I had some people reach out to me on social media, private message me, and they said, you need to see a medium. And I said, well, yeah, sure. If I go to hell, I need to see a medium. That's where I'm headed. So it was very fearful for me. But I wanted more, enough to overcome that fear. And so I did. Privately, I didn't tell my husband, I didn't tell anybody, secretly went to see a medium. She was very well known and had a great reputation. And I took a chance. And when I walked out of that first session with her, it was just shortly after a month after Andy had passed. And I knew without a doubt that I had talked to my son. And the last thing that he said in that session, I'll never forget it. He said, my mom is tough as nails and she's going to be fine. And I walked out of there and I thought, I am going to live every day to prove that kid right. It may not be easy, but I'm going to live every day to prove him right. And so I went on about my journey, and I gave myself permission to go back and see her every 6 months, because I recognized that I needed to still live in this world. I need to figure out how to be present here without always wishing to be in heaven, without wanting to be in heaven. And that was the messaging that I felt I was getting from my faith-based groups was, well, you'll see him eventually. And so there's this longing that you're living your life waiting for that moment later on, when in reality, we can be living it here. And we can be living it here, sharing it with our children in spirit. Now, I had a lot of layers in that onion of indoctrination to peel off, but with time and perseverance, persistence, patience, practice, all the P words I love, I did accomplish that. And it was life-changing for me. The signs began to come, from Andy to me myself, little by little. And, the more that I opened up my mind and thought process, the more that I could see them. And then I probably look like one of those deranged people we see on the street where I'm wandering around talking to what we think is nobody, but in reality, I'm talking to my kid. And really and these days I'm talking to my husband, because it's been just 2 years since my husband passed. So my son's kind of had to take a back burner in the conversation sense, and my husband's front and center right now. But I do think about that sometimes as I'm sitting. The good news is we now have those earphones, where people they're talking, they're not talking to their phone. And so they're just sort of talking in the air. So I think, oh, they probably think I have earpods or AirPods. And so I'm talking to someone, not knowing that I'm talking to my kid spirit. So I love that, wondering what people are thinking. What else do I want to talk about? When she talked about 2 years of hell, and that was Lisa Marie's statement. And that's really what I would have described my life too. She just didn't wait long enough. And she just didn't, I don't fault her for what she said. I don't fault her for being so heartbroken, because frankly, that's the messaging that was surrounding her. Those are the people that were surrounding her. And without a different set of information coming into you, it's really hard to overcome what the world thinks and what it perceives, and to take this leap into a whole different way of living. I've been so bold as to say, it's important for me to say that I am no longer grieving. I have let it go. Are there moments of sadness for me? Of course. Are there moments of longing, missing my son, my husband, my mom? Yes, there are. But they're moments, and then they leave. And so I don't feel that need to be overshadowed by this dark thing called grief. I don't want to be defined that way. And honestly, I do a lot of videos, and I have a large following on Facebook and podcasts and stuff like that. I can tell you 100%, there's nobody that thinks that I'm sad per se. Sometimes that bothers me a little bit, because I don't want them to think I'm too whatever, but that is how I am. That's how I feel right now. I have so much joie de vivre in me, and Andy had that. And so I've taken that on, and I want to share that with the world. Who your child is up to you to share 100%. Share that joie de vivre that your child brought into your life. Create that legacy that your child left in you into the world. You can, just by living your life fully and wholly. And it's a whole different, amazing way to live. But you've got to do the work. You've got to, you've got to read some books. You've got to watch some videos. You've got to surround yourself with some great mentors. And that's what we do here. And that's what Elizabeth has, this amazing platform for, what a plethora of speakers there is, what all these books that you can look on the website, and you can look at all the books that they have taken the time to read and vet, and not just one of them, but multiple people that read and vet these books to make sure they're hopeful and healing for you guys. So take advantage of all of the resources that are available to you. And with that, I want to leave you with one little quote, and then we can open up for questions. I love this quote. I heard this at none other than a memorial service, and it was some neighbors, and they had passed. They were adults, and they were motorcycle riders. And I love this quote. Life is not a journey to the grave with the intention of arriving safely in a well-preserved body, but rather to skid in broadside, thoroughly used up, totally worn out, and loudly proclaim, "Wow, what a ride!" I want that. I want to proclaim, wow, what a ride. And I want you to also.
That's beautiful, Leanne. Oh my goodness. Before questions start, what I'd really like for you to do is tell about how Andy lived and about his personality, because I think that what you did when Andy passed is very unusual, and it's in your book, but I don't know if very many people are aware of exactly what happened and how you worked so carefully to make sure to protect all of those who love Andy at that time. Could you maybe tell about Andy, and then tell about how the service went and what happened after?
You know, the name of my foundation is Andy Hull's Sunshine Foundation, because his nickname was Sunshine, because that's what he brought to the table. That's what he came with every day. That, like I said earlier, that joie de vivre, that he just brought that everywhere he went. And so it was contagious. He was a very gifted athlete. He was being scouted by professional baseball teams. His pitching coach was the Kansas City Royals pitching coach. He was a left-handed pitcher. His hitting coach was the Rockies hitting coach. So this was a very talented baseball player. But more than that, he was a youth leader at church. His favorite verse was Ephesians 6:10, put on the full armor of God. So he was very faith-based. He was one step away from being an Eagle Scout. He loved wakeboarding. He did backflips on his wakeboard, which of course his pitching coaches were not happy with. He would love to go snowboarding. He loved life. He just did. So it was a real disconnect for people, for his friends, and for anybody. If you interviewed 100% of the people, there was 100% that would have said, maybe somebody else's kid, maybe someone else, but not Andy. Andy would never have died by suicide. So that was very hard to reconcile for people. And I knew that. I knew he had this circle of influence to so many kids, so many people, that we all know the statistics with suicide, that they're very high for follow-up suicide, even within their own family. They call it copycat suicide. You can call it whatever you want. And I didn't want that to happen. So I went out on that with that mission to make sure that none of his friends, that nobody followed in his footsteps. And I started the nonprofit foundation. And it began with me speaking at his high school to 3,000 kids just 4 months after Andy passed. And with that, and we did a fundraiser at an amusement park, and we raised $10,000. And so then we did scholarships. And I asked the kids who were potential recipients to write essays on why you matter, as perceived by yourself, by your friends and family, by your teachers, by whomever. Why do you matter? And how can you take that message forward as you go to college? So with the scholarship money, how can you continue messaging that you matter, not just to yourself, but to others? And what I found was such a healing journey for me in understanding that oftentimes healing begins when you take your eyes off yourself and onto someone else. And you focus on how can it, and I'm sure that all of us can relate to this. If we go to a meeting, or if we're talking to a new parent, and we may be a year into our journey, and there's someone that's 1 month into their journey, and you go, wow, okay, we have made progress. And how can I help you? How can I pull you along? Because you remember what it was like to be at 1 month. How can I pull you along? And that's really the function of our group here, is we come here, and then we turn into mentors to help others move forward in addition. So the foundation has grown beyond that, and we do a lot of work. I speak around the country to high schools, military bases, churches, and it's expanded beyond my messaging of suicide prevention, because what I really want people to understand is healthy coping skills, the tools, that this journey is not a passive one, it's an active one. So if you're sitting there waiting for healing, you're going to be waiting for healing. You have to do something about it.
That's beautiful. I wanted to expand on what you were saying about the fact that you were coming to these meetings for 2 years. thinking that I was way too upbeat and oh my gosh,
Yes.
I want what she's having, but this just kind of drives me crazy going to these meetings and feeling better when you left. Obviously you wouldn't have been coming back if that wasn't the case. But the turning point that I'd love for you to talk about as well was one night at a place called Storm Wisdom here in the Valley. I went to see a medium who actually had a healing center where we started out meeting called Mariposa, Casa Mariposa. And she was doing readings there. She had moved to Colorado and I just went to support her. I bought a ticket, went by myself. I was sitting in the middle and Heather came out and the first thing she says is that she has a young boy in spirit who played baseball, who wore crazy colored Converse shoes, who she sees a big thing of a big picture of all these teammates all wearing yellow that was printed. And she just told all this information. And I knew it was for Leanne because I knew her well enough at the time. And she said, Andy is telling me that he wants you to call his mom. She's in trouble. And it was about 10 o'clock at night by the time I got out, and I knew Leanne well enough to know that she goes to bed fairly early. So I didn't call her until the next day. And maybe you can pick up from there, Leanne, what happened.
Yeah, and I'll condense it. It's not been a pretty journey for the rest of my kids. They've all struggled in their own ways. My military boys, the worst of all, because the military doesn't have a path for their servicemen or women to process grief and loss, and especially suicide. They talk a big talk, but the reality is not really there. So anyway, my oldest son was struggling. I took him on a wilderness detox trip. I drove all the way with his fifth wheel. I drove him up there all the way to North Dakota and with an IV hooked to him because he was so sick. And I knew that he was either going to die here or I was going to do whatever I could to help him. And so I'd never driven a fifth wheel before. So it was very exciting, let me tell you, especially with my kid in the back, just in the condition he was. But he made some progress and then he slipped backwards and I ended up breaking my ankle up in North Dakota, or actually in Montana on our way back. And he was so out of it in the trailer, in the camper, that I broke it outside and I couldn't even get up off the ground. And somebody in the campsite heard me crying, came over, got me into the camper and said, because it's too late to call, it was middle of the night. And they put me in the camper and I said, could you please come back in the morning so that I can drive myself to the hospital? Because I knew I'd broken my ankle. So broke the ankle, got there. And of all things, it was so funny in retrospect, but I'm in the emergency room and I'm crying. I'm very distraught. And my son's name is Andrew, as my tattoo here. His name is Andrew. And the doctor walks in and he says, let's address your emotional state first. Let's get you some pain medication. He said, I'm Dr. Andrew. And I went, of course you are. And it just diffused me right then and there. And I felt like my son had sent him. And so it was an ugly journey home for me to drive home. They couldn't cast my ankle because it was too swollen. And I couldn't take pain pills or I wouldn't have been able to drive and get my kid home. So I'm going through Salt Lake City and I see Elizabeth calling me and I'm like, the first time she called, I was like, yeah, no, I'm not taking this because I was so distraught. And I was still too far away from home. It was taking all I could. And I finally answered the next time. And she's like, she told me this and she says, Andy says you need help. And I was like, yes, I need help. And she said, how long before you get home? And I think I was going to get home that day at the end of the day. And she met me at my house, had groceries purchased for my family, helped me unpack my luggage and get to my, and it was just so amazing to me that my son, without me even being there, would communicate with someone else and bring that help to me that I needed. I really needed that. I really would love to share that communication with Clay if we have the time really quick.
That would be wonderful. But I just wanted to go back and say that what was so amazing is that the moment that Heather was saying this to me, you were stepping out of your truck into a hole and breaking your ankle. So obviously, Andy he came through first. He was like, oh my gosh, my mom needs help. So yes, I would love to have you talk about the communication with Clay as well.
Well, and Clay's my husband. And so this is, obviously it's not my child, but on the night of our 40th anniversary, so we'd had this wonderful day of celebration. My husband was not sick. He was not on any medication. He did not have COVID, nothing. We just bought property the day before to build our retirement home on. So we danced around the fire pit to this amazing music. And it was weird because I said some really weird things that night instead of just, well, because we were videotaping it. I didn't just say, happy anniversary, babe. I said, I have loved you from before, whatever the heck that means. I love you now, and I'll love you then. And I look back at that and listen to it and go, what the heck did I say? So when I got up in the middle of the night, I heard a yell, not a scream, but a yell. And I reached over to see if Clay was in bed, and he wasn't. And so I got up, walked into the bathroom. I saw him standing there, and I said, are you okay? And he said, yes, I'm fine. Okay. I went back to bed, woke up the next morning, walked out. I saw him sitting in the chair in the living room. He had his feet on the coffee table. His arms were on the armchair, and he was sitting up. And I walked around, made my coffee, walked around, kissed him on the cheek, and obviously knew that he had passed. And so I got a call that afternoon from that same medium that I met with Andy. And she said, LeAnn, I don't do readings for people who are newly bereaved because they're generally crazy. They're so distraught that they can't even hear anything that could possibly be coming through. But she said, I know you're not crazy. So she said, your people want to talk to you. Can I give you a reading Wednesday? So this was Sunday. Yes. So Sunday comes. The first thing she says, Clay is standing there with a bullhorn, and he's going, he's literally telling me he tried to wake you up. He yelled as loud as he could so that he could say goodbye. And I knew then, I don't know where my picture just went. Anyway, I knew right then and there that was his apparition in the bathroom, that he had already passed. But because I thought back and I go, could I really remember him saying I'm okay, or was that just in my head? And I knew that he had communicated to me afterwards. So that was amazing. Can you hear me?
Yes, I muted myself. I'm sorry.
Oh.
I had the dogs barking outside, and so I wasn't able to unmute myself. But anyway, yes, that was just amazing. And really, I think that your whole journey has been it's been filled with miracles, really. And
Yeah.
I am excited to have you explaining to all of our parents that either a child that passes by suicide or a child that passes in any way is not a life sentence to be unhappy for the rest of our lives. That is not what our kids want. They want us to move forward and to be happy, healthy, and whole, just as they are, because they're so happy over there. And the most exciting thing for them is to be able to see that we are doing things in their name and that we are doing things to remember them. And so your foundation, your wonderful book, all of the things that you're doing for helping parents heal as well are things that I know that Andy is very, very proud of. I wanted to just go back to, again, what happened right after Andy passed. LeAnn was amazing because not only did she, speak to all of the kids, 3,000 kids, but she had the kids at her house for about a week, didn't you? All of his friends, they just camped out there. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Be-
so, they came over immediately that night as well, because the coaches started telling their teams. Andy was on multiple teams, and so it was just spread like wildfire, and the kids showed up, but the sheriff wouldn't let them into the house, so we were at the neighbors, but there were lots and lots of kids there that night, and I just knew that, I don't know, it was a strange divine experience for me. I knew that that was important for me to tell them, it's not your fault. Andy loved you. Andy loved you. And so that was the message that came out of my mouth. The next day we were back in the house and they all came over. And that night, my daughter had painted this big blue heart on the floor in Andy's room. And so all of his friends came in and they literally laid around that blue heart and they wrote messages all around it. They were going through his drawers, his closet. And it was so interesting to watch them just want to be there because they weren't afraid, because I wasn't afraid. And that's what led them to want to stay. You are so in charge of how everybody else feels in relation to your child's passing. It's 100% up to you. You can control how this journey looks for you and for others around. I said to a friend of mine recently, because she calls me a couple times a year and we go out, and she always has this heaviness about her, this sense of sadness. And I told her, I said, listen, I don't want to be that sad mom. You think of me as a sad mom that you got to do this charity case to take me out at Christmas time every year. I want you to call me because I'm fun to be with. So she's like, well, I just feel so, and she does. She feels so sad. And I said, let it go. Andy's not sad. I'm not sad. I'm good. Practice, even try that. I know for some of you that are new in this journey, saying that's really hard, but begin to say, when someone asks you, how are you? Because that's the dreaded question. I'm good. See what that feels like. Try that out.
Thank you. I wanted to thank you so much, Leanne. So much you say is just resonates with me. And I know for myself, I was paralyzed for almost a year, dreading that someone would say, how many children do you have? And until I found the words to say, I have a daughter, she resides in spirit, and how a lot of people would just let it go. They wouldn't even ask any further questions about it, which is fine. But I love how you speak of the importance of the language that we use and the words we choose. I do not want to be defined as a bereaved parent. I mean, to me, it is one of the saddest words that exists. And yes, I was in grief and bereaved for a period of time, but I am no longer that person. And I don't want to be defined by grief. Grief is not my life any longer. I live with loss, my daughter, my parents, multiple family members, but I am not living a grieving. I am no longer grieving, like you said. And I think it's really important that we choose the words, we are careful with our language.
Yeah, it's like people now want to say, oh, you're a widow. Ooh, what a terrible word. No, I'm not a widow. Dang it. So I don't know what word we're going to come up with. So
That's what I am, a shining light wife.
shining light wife. There we go, Elizabeth.
We have a question, Elizabeth. Somebody has their hand up.
Good. So let's see. Mom has a question. I love that. So let me
I've
ask.
asked her.
Yes.
You can unmute. There you go.
Is it me that says mom on there?
Yes, which is a beautiful name.
Hi, I'm Roseanne. Actually, it probably says mom because my daughter Cassie had set up my Zoom on this phone, so she called me mom. So I can't even believe I'm here. It's kind of weird that I'm even talking here because I was just meeting with my tapping person that I meet with, because I do tapping every week.
Awesome.
And it was really, I was in a lot of tears and stuff like that. And I just, Leanne, I just commend you because I've been following you since the day Cassie passed. I don't know how far out you are. Can I ask you?
10 years.
10 years. Okay. So I'm coming up on 3 years this month. It'll be the January 21st. And, when I heard about Lisa Marie's son, Lisa Marie dying, I had a heavy heart last night, and I could relate to a lot. And I remember reading that People's Magazine article at the time, and understanding and feeling everything she said. And I still do. But where I'm at now, and I'm having a little bit of a struggle in trying to identify where this is going, but and maybe you can help me, which is so weird that after I just finished this tapping thing, I happen to fall upon this meeting, and I'm like, oh, what's happening with her? I'm like, oh, Leanne's talking. So I don't even know how I got here, but I do believe it's Cassie. So my question is, in my third year, I noticed a lot of shifting, like more so towards the end of year 3. Year 1 and 2, I had such a connection with Cassie. I felt that she was very much here with me physically, and I had signs, and it was just amazing. In my third year, as I came into my third year, I felt that the signs were not as often as they were. They were kind of like fading. They were different. They were definitely different. And so much so that I believe this is a sign that she led me here today with you speaking. So, whereas before it was more the butterflies, the things that the simple signs. And now I think they're more deep. But my question is, so I've been feeling this shift. And I also feel like the shift in grief is that, like, I think I'm moving forward, but at the same token, I've been feeling really sad because I don't feel her as much as I felt her here. And, and I believe that she's on her own evolving soul journey. I've been to mediums. I've been told, she's an evolved soul and also. But did you feel like in the beginning of in the beginning of the grief, that when you did start to feel those shifts in grief, I feel like I'm either guilty, or I feel like I don't want to lose the memory. I don't want to lose the memory of her. So I have a fear of losing that memory of her. And I certainly don't want others to lose that fear, to lose the memory of her. And I also feel that because I feel she's moving forward and moving on and evolving, it's a very scary place for me to be in. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how to embrace that this is like this is part of it, and this is the next thing.
So let me help you with that if I can. I have 2 boys, like I said, I have 3 more children, and my 2 sons in particular, my one who, they're both military. So, but the one, he's like, Mom, Beth may call you every day, but I'm not going to. I've got a life. I'm busy. I'm doing stuff. And so that has always resonated with me in that sense that if we look at our children and we think if they were here in the physical, we would be sending them off. They would be having their own lives. And we would have to reconcile with that. I mean, people talk about that all the time, empty nest syndrome. So it's definitely something you have to get used to. So this is the same thing. You have to get used to this new relationship with your daughter. It is new. And I'm okay with it now. It was uncomfortable, but the more I practiced it and the more I was, I really went through that process of what would I want Andy to be doing? He's not my caretaker. He's not in charge of my emotional process. I don't want him to be that way. And other people forgetting, no one will ever remember your child anyway, the way you do. So I can tell you at 10 years, I think of Andy as often and as close. It's different. So we've associated that heavy grief with that we're connected to our child, and that we're afraid if we shed that grief, then those feelings won't be there. It's different. They're different feelings. I'm so glad that I shed those heavy grief feelings so that now I can just be lighthearted with him. I am lighthearted with him. I honestly, I promise you, I don't feel that heaviness at all. The 10-year anniversary triggered me. 9 years, I was out of state. I wasn't even around. So 9 years didn't bug me. For whatever reason, 10 years for me was like, wow, it's been 10 years. I want people to know that I'm, that it's just as impactful to me at 10 years as it was to 1. There's no way I could convey that. So I kept telling myself, reminding myself, This isn't about that. This isn't about how much I grieve, how long I grieve. This is about my healing. There's no prescribed length of time that's ever gonna be enough for you if you stay in that state of mind. It's always like you're holding it so that you're afraid of letting it go because it defines that relationship. You can have a new relationship. And I don't hear from Andy that much. I don't get a lot of signs. And I've just had to, you have to create a new life. Just like you
And
would if
that's
you
my,
did
that was
empty
my,
nesters.
yeah. And that was my question, because I know that with my oldest daughter, she's in California. I don't talk to her all the time. And,
Right.
she's living her life. So I get that. And so my question too is, do the signs, like, I felt she was so there with me because she was in the meetings was saying, Mom, I'm okay. Like, it was a message that I needed to know that
But
she
you
was
needed
okay.
that then. You needed
Right.
that then. And now you can, it's not letting her go. And the signs for me are not very often either with Andy. They have diminished. I picture him being super busy. And also we are supposed to live in this world. This is a different experience bodily than spiritually. So we're always going to feel that physical presence, that sensation we have with our child, we don't have that now. And that's the reality. So you can either embrace this new relationship or you can stay here that just feels sad and heavy. But practicing it, just practicing your language like Irene talked about, and visualization. I visualize what I imagine Andy doing now. I practice setting intentions for myself and new goals. So that would be a place I would tell you to start, is instead of so much of the focus of how do I stay connected, what do I need to do in my life to live a purposeful life?
Yeah. If I can interrupt just for a second too, I just want to say that it is possible to continue that relationship that with the different signs that are coming in. And I think that meditation is a way that really helps. Also, being able to do healing that raises your vibration. I'm specifically thinking about Carol, who talks to Tyler throughout the day. He never stops talking to her, and she's been on this journey longer than you have. I think that for me, I have ringing in my ears all day long. I know that it's Morgan and other kids telling me that I need to be doing things. I have things that pop up during the day that are pretty miraculous, and I don't necessarily always write about them. But one of the things that I have had too on this journey is that Morgan's friends, even to this day, write me and tell me how he's affecting their lives. So it doesn't have to be that way, that the signs stop or slow down. If you work at it, if you work at the meditation, and the meditation can be a moving meditation. It can be hiking out in nature. It can be doing yoga. It can be grounding your feet into the earth. It can be doing, there are so many different ways of being able to feel more connected, but we have to take the time to do that. If you want to take that time, then you can. But this might be a point in your journey, where you don't have that time, and it's okay, because time is completely different for them over there. They're not going to be sitting around twiddling their thumbs and waiting and saying, okay, when's mom going to have time to talk to me? They are very busy. So if you want to continue that relationship, you definitely can. Leanne's super busy. She has all these things going on at once. And I think that she's found a way to heal where she doesn't need these signs. But if you do need them, they still can keep coming to you. And
I meant to say that too. I know I heard myself when I was talking to say there are a lot of people that still get lots of signs and connect. So everybody's journey is so different, and to not, the comparison. And what Elizabeth said, it's funny because for me, I said that my background is faith-based. And so I have this in my head, the the verse, blessed is he who believes without seeing. And so I feel like I have a passion to share with other people that we have a purpose in our lives that is very spiritual and goes beyond all of the evidence. And so I'm not so in need of the evidence where other people are, and you may be. I don't need it. I feel it. So that's the difference for me.
Yeah. And I think that there are different ways that our kids are going to show that they're with us. I mean, I get hugs throughout the day from Morgan and from Chelsea, and that's enough for me.
Well, my writing is definitely inspired by spirit. My writing is not me. I honestly, when I sit to write, it's so funny because I'll start and I'll sit to write and I think this is what I'm going to write about. And I start writing and then I'm like, oh, I guess I need to change the title because that's not what I wrote about. But it's so interesting to experience other ways that spirit messages you.
Yeah,
Well,
I think it's pretty amazing that I came upon this meeting after I just spent all this time talking about this situation.
oh, it's Cassie.
And yeah, it
Well, that's
definitely
here.
Cassie.
And
Yeah.
That's your sign. That's your
yes,
sign.
that's your sign. And we have
Yes.
one more question from Barb. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Irene and I have to meet with someone with another group right after this, but maybe we have time to, and thank you so much for coming on, Mom. And I'm going to go ahead and just ask Barb to unmute. And maybe, do you have time for one more question, Leanne?
Yes.
Okay, great. So can
Okay.
you
Hey,
unmute?
well, yeah, I think I am unmuted. This may take longer than time allows, so that's okay. I come to a lot of meetings and things. I'm just over a year out. My son Jordan, 25, completed suicide just in December of 21, and I feel like I've come a long way. I've read lots of books and done meditations and things like that. I was just wondering if there was any kind of toolbox or something to put in my toolbox, a practice, a strategy that would help me move beyond his last moments.
Yeah.
And because that's what kind of gets me stuck. And
Yes.
I feel like if I could do that, it would just help.
This
Okay,
needs to be a part of this talk. I'm so glad. So take your time telling her because Leanne will give you some great tools.
This is the best one. And Andy passed in December, just like, when did your son pass? December.
December 14th, 21.
Andy was December 11th. So yeah, anyway, so yes, suicide, any accident, any death that is, and probably any passing may leave those images in our head and things that we see in moments of that end time that are hard for us to eradicate out of our replaying. And so I stayed in the house. Andy took his life in his bedroom across from mine. So I stayed in the house after Andy passed. My daughter, my grandkids, everybody was living with me. I knew I needed to create a home. But every day when I would drive home, I would replay those images in my head and it would destroy me. It was just like more. And I knew I had to fix those images. I had to fix that film that was replaying in my head over and over again. So I practiced, and I'll tell you what I did, but I want you to know I did it for 2 years without any result, but I started it right afterwards. But I did it for 2 years consistently. I could tell you every detail now about that day. I won't, but I can, and it has no impact on me. It has no effect. It doesn't, nothing, because what I did worked so well. So when I would start to see those images, I would literally, and I would tell myself to stop, and I'd say it out loud. So if I was driving or whatever I was doing, maybe I'd pull over and I would literally say, stop, Leanne, stop. And so that command tells your brain to stop. Now, it's not going to last but just seconds. So you have to fill it then once you've stopped it. You've interrupted the film that's playing. You've now stopped it. Now, what are you going to do? You're rerouting those images. You're rerouting them and rewiring them. And so I picked a an episode with my son that when he was pitching and there were scouts behind the backstop and they had radar guns on him. And it was 2 months before he passed, but he was on the mound. He pitched lights out and he literally leapt off the mound like a gazelle as I was pacing, watching him. And he knew he had just delivered the game of his life. And I knew that his future had just been handed to him. And it was still, just even right now, it creates goosebumps. So that memory, that vignette, I would start to tell it to myself in either silently, or if I was alone, I'd like I'm telling someone, and Andy was on the pitching mound, and I picked that moment because I recognized it created a chemical reaction in me 100% of the time, not just occasionally, but every time. 10 years later, it's still creating that effect for me. And so it was changing me. And what it did is by the time I got done then replaying that scene, it allowed me that time it's like a bridge that takes you from this old memory and takes you over to this new spot where you're in a different state of mind. And then you can go, all right, now I've got to go do something else to help myself. I've got to play a song. I've got to call a friend. I've got to take a walk. I'm going to do something else that reinforces that I'm at this different place now than I was just a few minutes ago on this other side of the bridge. And I'd have to do it time after time after time. I didn't know what I was doing. I knew that it was effective short term, but then at about 2 years, I was like, well, shoot, it was automatic. I don't have to replay that vignette anymore. I go instantly. If I think about that moment, like if right now I can think about that moment, my brain's automatically on the pitching mound. I'm no longer there. And even if I replay it verbally, it has no emotional attachment to me. So I replaced that view, that film, with something better. But you have to be patient and persistent and practice, and never give up, even if you're not seeing the results of it. I promise you, if you do that, you will own that view.
Thank you.
Leanne, I just wanted to add that I printed out a stop sign, a big red stop sign, and put it on my medicine cabinet mirror. And anytime I went to that time when Carly passed, that trauma, I would force myself to go walk to the stop sign and look at it to stop myself from the thought. And then after months, I got so tired of having to get up and walk to the stop sign that I helped myself. And Barb, I also wanted to let you know that we do have, my sister, Judith Hancox, does Show Me Healings once a month for helping parents heal. And it's trauma recovery work that she does. And it's done once a month on a Monday. So you might want to look into that as well.
Tapping.
Really action-based, really too.
Yeah.
What we're all talking about is something that's an action-based rather than just letting that consume you.
And Judy is going to be having her next meeting on February 13th, but you need to sign up beforehand. So the information on the event itself says where to send information so that you'll get the Zoom link. But I think that would be a really wonderful thing for you to attend as well. And for anyone who's interested in doing the Show Me Healing Circle, which is wonderful. And I am just so grateful to you, Leanne, for doing this on the spur of the moment. Obviously, this is something that everyone was wanting in our group today, and it definitely was needed. So
Thank you.
And we always ask everybody to unmute and say thank you and goodbye. If everybody would like to, so then
Thank you, Leanne. This
Thank
was
you so
wonderful.
much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Leanne.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye,
Have a
everybody.
great
have a
day.
wonderful day, everyone. We'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.